Hello everyone, and welcome to another Studio 346 flag stop. This is Tom, the art director for Century of Steam, and I'm here joined by Brett, one of our researchers. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I feel like you covered it pretty well there. Happy to be here, Tom. First time on one of the devlogs, so I'm excited to talk about some stuff today.
Yeah, it's great to have you on, and this is something very near and dear to you. We're going to be talking about Ford Model Ts.
Yes, I love Model Ts. I was so excited when we were doing some of the initial road mapping for the project, and I can't remember if it was you or somebody else that threw out the idea of including RGS inspection car number 1. It's this wonderful little backwoods but somehow beautiful example of a Model T turned into a rail car, and I'm just so excited that it's going to be in the game.
Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting ways in which it's modified, because it doesn't have the original car body or even the original fenders or anything, but it translates really well, and it feels very proportional to 3-foot. But yeah, I don't remember exactly who prompted it either, but I'm really glad it did make the list, and there were other things that we were considering for this, but ultimately, this is kind of why when people ask us, hey, do you want us to include, are you guys going to include X equipment or Y equipment? We know that comes from a point of passion and really wanting to see your favorite touchstones be in here. It's just we kind of, in some cases, don't know until we get all of the resources we need for it, which ones we can do proper. And that's why we sort of hold those cards close to the vest, is it gives us room to navigate that until we can get it locked in for sure. But moving on from that, RGS Inspection Car 1 is really interesting. It was built in 1913 out of parts from a 1910 Ford Model T, and it had its wheelbase shortened, it had a new wooden box body added to it, it had a canopy, and it had 20-inch flange wheels put on. And the RGS used this for all things from inspecting the line to personal transport and dignitary trips to even occasional passenger service. But one thing that was really interestingly noted is there are period references to its potential ability to assist in remote maintenance of locomotives and track, which is something we're gonna touch back on a little later, but let's keep talking about the T. There was a period newspaper reporting it could go 60 miles an hour, although this probably could only happen in neutral on a downhill. The RGS had really steep grades on either side of Lizard Head Pass. But a standard Model T had bigger wheels and could only do 45, so 60 under its own power, probably not likely, but, flying down grade until one of its numerous wrecks, which it wrecked a lot, is a lot more plausible and certainly could have happened. The first major wreck that it had is sort of the biggest change in its silhouette. If you look at build photos of it, you can see it has a very squared off and open front to the canopy. But what this basically acted like is a hang glider, and it literally just lifted itself off of the track and derailed. So you gotta keep in mind, this machine, even when rebuilt, was only 1,200 to 1,400 pounds at most, which is extremely, extremely light for a rail vehicle. And so, changes for that are documented. There's also a lot of changes in the light fixtures. It starts initially with its 2 standard headlights, and then the front 2 headlights get removed, and it gets a center headlight with 2 later truck headlights that are not original to it. So that changes, and that's going to be some of the options we allow, as well as the option for a grill badge for the logo, which, that's something else we should probably talk about, is how we came up with the faux branding, as it were. Yeah, we had a few ideas floating around. We were looking at, I think Fox was one of the ones floated. FERP was another fun one.
Yeah.
And in the discussion of we need some faux branding, because obviously both Ford and the Model T are both still trademarked. In talking about we need faux branding, someone had sort of the Breaking Bad moment of no, we need faux branding.
Right.
It was still 4 letters, it fit the font, and so that's what we ended up going with. So, yeah, in the world of Century of Steam, it's in the way that Standard Oil is, Calico and all of these other things.
We were blessed by the mechanical genius of Mr. Henrik Foe in the Century of Steam universe.
Yeah, so just fun ways of doing our own world building in order to get around active trademarks and stuff, which gives a bit of extra individualized character to this game.
Yeah, which is something that, in terms of other games, we've actually had to deal with less than, more modern titles, simply because so many of the trade names we're using have been, effectively dead for 100 years or more. This one is a pretty profound exception to the rule, though, of oh yeah, this is still something in the cultural zeitgeist. we have to be careful not to step on anybody's toes.
Exactly, yeah. And at the end of the day, like, it would be nice to, for the historical thing, try to make a fair use case, but we do not have either the legal funds or a legal team that we want to even take that risk. So it's better to just take the safe artistic route there.
Nor are we really concerned with wasting time on that when we've got a video game to make, and our top priority has always been and remains getting the game pushed as far as we can, as fast as we can, to get it in the hands of the consumer, that being everybody listening.
Mm-hmm. And we are continually blessed with your guys' support in helping us do that. The actual RGS Inspection Car 1, I mean, obviously this predates the Geese, and by the time the first, later Geese start to show up, like the Motor 1, which is the Buick, and then later the Motor 2, and the, like, thing people mostly think about when they talk about RGS motors, or Geese specifically. So this is a neat little sort of preamble to that. The original inspection car, of course, was scrapped, so we got a lot of our reference, because photos are kind of sparse for this. We got a lot of our reference
setup anyway.
Yeah, we got a lot of our reference from the Ridgeway Railroad Museum, which built a replica for it. And there's photos and threads on narrowgauge-discussion-forum.com that even show, like, the thing under construction, which from our perspective of having to 3D model it was super helpful. Like, basic dimensions were given of the wheelbase changes and all these other things, which that's the other thing, is we touch on the thing always where every drawing is wrong in some way, and it's up to you to discern where, because, replication of a 3D artifact into a 2D space is always going to be imperfect. And a lot of the drawings we had for this were just straight up, like, 10% too small. But what we had were actual dimensioned drawings for a Model T proper of, it was built with famously a 100-inch wheelbase, and knowing that, we were able to scale the grille and the radiator and other parts that were carried over to the RGS 1 in order to correct the scale of that, so that was really handy.
Of all the things from that time period to get reference of, the Model T is one of, I don't want to say the easiest because that kind of diminishes the effort, but they made 16 million of them, and the joke is that they make so many replica parts even to this day, you could build a brand new one out of totally repop parts. So, although reference for the number 1 specifically was tricky, starting with the Model T was really the key that allowed us to move forward with the model.
Yeah, and honestly, like, so much of the reference was just going on eBay and looking up either new old stock or replica parts that match the original castings. Like, I remember being sent a lot of eBay links to a part that we'll show here called the Hogshead, which is a casting cover for the combination engine block transmission. But there are some pitfalls and caveats with researching Model Ts, which is that they changed the design constantly. And so you need someone who knows that, and preferably someone who's actually had one, in order to navigate those differences, which, Brett, that's why we have you on. You owned and drove a Model TT, so tell us a bit what that was like.
I did. It was a COVID project, if you'll believe it. I bought it out of a farmer's field just north of Denver, and brought it down to Golden, where I was living at the time, and over the course of lockdown, rebuilt every square inch of this Model TT, which we say Model TT, for those that don't know, that's the dedicated truck version of the Model T that they offered in later years, which had some common parts from the very original Model T. They made Model Ts from 1908 up to 1927, and there were a few pretty major rebuilds and differences in parts throughout that time on some things. On others, like the engine was basically the original design all the way through. The radiators changed, the styling changed a little bit, the ignition system, the magneto, all of that remained basically from the beginning of the design all the way.
Yeah, the Model Ts are really interesting, seeing those design changes and what does stay the same. And it is blessedly simple compared to a lot of other cars, with one notable distinction, which is that it does not drive like any other car in the world.
No, that was something that I learned very quickly after getting my truck assembled and taking it out on the road for the first time. Not only are the controls totally different, which we'll probably talk about in a minute, the feel is very different from a modern car. It's not that, you step on the pedal that's closest to a clutch and it doesn't feel like a clutch. It kind of feels like you're stepping on a soap crate that's on top of a wood chipper or something. It's not a very pleasant feeling, but at the same time is very raw and honest in just how mechanical it is. You can really feel the thing moving and juddering, and it's imperfect, but it's very reliable, and you can just kind of feel that it's wanting to keep going the whole time.
Yeah, there is a regular car reviews episode on a Model T, and some of the things that he talks about there kind of play into that. Like his first impression was it felt like a lawnmower more than a car.
That's very apt, especially considering how when you drive it, it's all cruise control all the time, similar to a lot of like riding equipment rather than an automobile.
Yeah, and the other thing is like it feels so raw and borderline feral, but like this was a car that had to be so simple, so bulletproof, so repairable at home. Like it was built for a world, as RCR puts it, that did not have roads.
Which really is true, and it's kind of a shame that when the RGS took it off of the road that didn't exist, they gave it a road and took all the job away from that suspension.
Yeah, and it is interesting to think that like the railroad it ran on was probably smoother than any dirt road in southwestern Colorado that it was been on before.
Absolutely, assuredly.
Yeah, because the main thing that they majorly rebuilt on that, like the rear suspension is surprisingly similar between a standard Model T and the RGS car. The front's totally different. They put in a pair of longitudinal leaf springs that are sort of doubled up on itself like an ellipse. So very different front end.
Cause, what you'd see on a wagon.
Yeah, because obviously it doesn't have to steer. The steering column is still there. And there is one weird quirk where it's hard to tell in photos because they're often so dark what year it would have used for a steering column. Because that's the other thing, is like it was built 1910, turned into the RGS car in 1913, but in all of its wrecks and rebuilds, it could have gotten parts from any other era. So the replica currently uses a 1915 steering column, roughly, in terms of the appearance of it, so we just stuck with that because it's what we had the best reference for. But yeah, the rest is sort of just a crapshoot, really. We initially built it with, I think, a 1915 era magneto switch, and then later changed it to a 1910 version. And the manufacturer for those, I think, is still active, so we had to come up with a different name for it, and we ended up using your initials and changing the location of its manufacturer to the fictional town of Wiebold, Colorado, as a tribute to the work you've been able to contribute for it.
Look, Ma, I made it into the game. Well, and the help that I've contributed with reference and anecdotes about working on my T is really, those efforts are dwarfed in comparison to the actual modeling pull and the primary research pull, both of which you undertook to create the model. I can't imagine starting out to build this and now seeing the model rendered in game, like I'm sure we've shown in some of the video. It looks fantastic. I'm so excited to be able to mess around with this thing.
I'm super excited too, and there were discussions we had of like, obviously a T better than most people, and maybe most people who will play the game especially, but we sort of made that decision at some point. Let's represent it to the best and fullest ability that we can. Like we don't really take any shortcuts with our steam engines unless it's specifically removing pain points or what have you, but as far as the experience of driving a T, this is going to sound weird. I've tried to learn driving a standard manual transmission, and I can't wrap my head around it. I actually can wrap my head around a Model T, even though it is so weird and different, because even though there's the intimidating factor of there are 3 pedals on the floor and none of them are the gas, and then there's also a set of handles on the steering column that control not just your throttle, but also your spark advance for the timing of the engine, it's surprisingly straightforward once you learn the quirks. And one of the other quirks is the handbrake is also technically half of the clutch, because it has a mechanical interlocking and like scratch plate between the clutch pedal and the handbrake, where the position of the handbrake informs how far the clutch pedal can throw. And we've actually, even though you said initially it's probably something that nobody's going to notice, we ended up doing it anyway because we thought, you know what, we're Studio 346, what the hell. Almost no one's going to see it, but the people who do have these cars and know them and love them are going to see that and know that we see and appreciate them.
Absolutely. And talking about the controls, it's, they're very different from a normal car, but in discussions of how to implement it for the video game, they actually, Model Ts that is, lend themselves pretty well to a video game environment, because rather than a normal manual transmission where you have some amount of revving and clutch feathering that goes on, the proper way to drive a Model T is very binary. It is, you gently but firmly put your foot down on the clutch pedal and you push it all the way down. There's no halfway. There's no this, that, or the other. You are on the pedal or you are off the pedal, with the exception of shifting. But that is, like you said, interlocked with the handbrake, and that lends itself pretty well to, okay, I do this, then I do this, then I do this. You're not balancing three things at once, like you'd be able to if you had 2 feet and 2 hands in the video game environment. We realize that your focus can only be split in so many places at once when you're running something like this.
Right, and luckily this is actually a little bit easier than an actual Model T because you just need to focus on direction and gear. You don't have to worry about steering. The track does that for you.
Yeah, I mean, a normal Model T, you're not really worried about steering. If you're worried about steering, you're going to have a conniption because it's much more of a suggestion anyway.
Yeah, the actual process, I mean, obviously there's the hand start, which is another fun thing that we want to model as well. Because there's just something so satisfying. You yank on it, just feels like this...
Sort of coughs into life.
Yeah, just all the things that give it character and its imperfections and its quirkiness and, you know, the possibility of it backfiring, which, you know, there's a reason they teach you to hold the hand crank of these a certain way, so if it does backfire, you don't break your thumb.
Yeah, are we going to model broken wrists in Century of Steam?
This is a railroad simulation and tycoon game. This is not a survival horror game. So unfortunately, bodily harm is out of scope, but one can imagine the many myriad of ways that one could mangle oneself. But, you know, we won't be getting too much into that. What we could get into is the actual use that we want to have for this thing, because it's all fine and well to have a way to get the player around in a different way, but it has to be in a format that is convenient and time efficient, so that owning this does not just get in the way of the big equipment, because obviously this is a very tiny machine. You could potentially use it to haul, you know, a flat car around the yard if you were in an absolute emergency, and maybe that would prevent a soft lock situation if all of your big equipment is broken down and in the roundhouse. But the main thing we want to use it for are pocket transport and maintenance of track. So by pocket transport, we mean this is not an object that always exists physically in the world. This exists in a form of hammer space. You have this on your person as an inventory item. And what you can do is, if you need it, you can walk up to a section of track and place it down, and that way it's always ready to go on hand, so that if you're stranded in the middle of nowhere and you need to get 3 miles back into town, you don't have to walk back into town to find where it is, because that defeats the purpose of having it. You just put it down and go.
You just pull the Model T out of your pocket and ride on into town.
Yep, and then obviously once you have it down, what we want to be able to do with it is have it be able to perform track maintenance. And it's not going to be a system where every single inch of track could potentially break down and you have to go out and hammer individual spikes. We still need to scale this as a game where one person can handle anywhere between 4 and 10 miles of railroad as a single player. Because as much as we want it to be a multiplayer experience, we can't ignore the fact that a lot of people will play this single player, and it has to work at that scaling.
50% train, 50% game. A single man does not a railroad run, however, a single man can run a railroad in the video game.
Yeah, because we want to scale things to where you get the experience and the flavor of doing some maintenance, but it's not a maintenance forward experience. It's a running the trains and managing the industries forward experience. But somewhere that would be a good proportion of overall track that usually has to be managed in real life versus track that can be managed well in a game would be something like switches. So obviously you run through a switch the wrong way, you could damage the points, or in some cases even explode the switch stand. And that means your switch could be out of order. That's something that, you know, obviously they're not going to always break down themselves, and the rate at which they break down depends on how much you're paying attention and being careful around your yards. But that then means that there's a use for this thing where you realize, oh shoot, you know, my engine is stuck in a broken switch. I need to go repair the switch somehow, so you could put down the Model T. And just like the period reports say, you know, you can go out and get parts to repair a switch, like a switch kit, and then drive it out there and repair the switch, put the car back in your pocket, so to speak, and then get back in the engine and be back on your way. So it gives you a little fun taste of maintenance away without it being such a domineering thing that's on a constant recurring schedule, because that's the other thing you don't want is if you leave track idle too long, then everything breaks down over time.
Right.
You know,
it's a video game, not a chore simulator.
Exactly. Like, it should be fun and rewarding, and we want it to be something that scales to player involvement. And so by making it something that can only happen when you have an oopsie, then you're not going to have to worry about things falling apart on their own. It's purely, did you screw up? Well, here's consequences for that, but even the consequences still mean you get to drive a fun little car.
Absolutely. Little car that is historically representative. It's in tune with the era and kind of the flavor we're hoping to get out of the game. It's really good for gameplay purposes, as we've discussed, and I think we're both really, really excited to see it in-game and see what people do with it.
Absolutely, and because something like this, there was only ever one inspection car like the one the RGS had, but it is representative of countless little road vehicles that were converted to railroad use, either for light passenger service or for emergency service like fire service.
Just off the top of my head, the CNS had one made out of Model T, the Uinta did as well, the Rio Grande one had one on the standard gauge, the West Side had a couple made out of Model A's. Cars like this were all over the place.
And I think it was you who was talking the other day about there was a Model T that had flanges built out of an automobile that they still drove it down the road.
Yes.
Somewhere to get gas.
That was on the CNS in its later days. They affectionately referred to it as the South Park Zephyr. It was built out of a Model T, and they, unlike this car, they left the steering rack in it, but had a pin so that when it was on the railroad track, they could pin the steering and it wouldn't, derail. But when they needed to go get gas, they would drive to, I think it was Bailey that had the gas station. They would roll into the depot, unpin the steering, and just drive it down the dirt road on the flanges to the gas station, fill her up, head back to the rail yard, jump it back on the tracks, and carry on.
Just super fun stories in a machine like that, just, environmental storytelling through the object. And I know some people are going to probably ask us, well, are we going to get the option to drive this on the ground? And the answer, unfortunately, is no. We are, at the end of the day, a train game, and I know some folks were a little confused, like, if we are a train game, why are we making a car like this that you can drive? But it's because it is essentially a rail vehicle still. It's just...
A railroad is so much more than just a steam engine and the cars behind it. It's the track, it's the infrastructure, and it's the little jalopies, like this one, that keep everything going at the end of the day.
Yeah, like the hobbits in the Lord of the Rings. All creatures, no matter how small, have their part to play.
And Lord knows this one's pretty small.
Yeah, it might actually be the smallest thing we have so far, but yes.
So far.
Thank you again so much, Brett, for coming on. This has been a joy to talk about, and again, we couldn't have made this part of the Century of Steam experience without you, so...
Yeah, I appreciate the kind words. I'm so excited to see it in the game, and hopefully I'll be back on one of these sometime soon.
Absolutely. We hope to see you then, and until then, thank you so much to all of our patrons for making this game possible. If you'd like to support what we do, then for as little as $2 a month, you can support us over at patreon.com/Studio346, and that way you'll be able to get devlogs like this a month early. So with that all said, thank you again, and take care until the next video. See you around.
Happy railroading!